Man, I bet no critic had that as their thumbnail. Yeah, that's an easy one to do. But I love creepy smiles, so I was excited to see this movie. I also apologize if the lighting's a little off in here. One of my lights just died here, so yeah, I just got one going, but it's a horror film, so it's creepy. Ooh. Anyway, I just saw the movie Smile, and I definitely got some thoughts on it. I also saw Hocus Pocus this week. That's why this one's more of a vlog review, and I'm kind of glad this is more of a vlog review because I kind of want to get your guys' feedback on this, because I got some thoughts, man, about this movie, and it is something where the ending does play a big part. I'm going to try my best not to go into spoilers. If I do go into spoilers, I'll let you know beforehand. I think I can talk about it without actually revealing what happens at the end. But it is, for me anyway, a big part in the enjoyment of this movie, or lack thereof. We'll get to that in a minute. Okay, real quick, this video's gonna be pretty long. I want to give my thoughts just on the movie in general, and I think the best way to do it, again, without going into the ending, is kind of just talk about my experience throughout, kind of from beginning to end, go through it in order. First off, I do like this movie. I was really impressed with a lot of things about it, to a point where I should make it very clear, anyone going to see this movie might not get what they think they were gonna get, because this film gives the impression that's kind of like a horror comedy, like a really, really dark, twisted comedy. I mean, all these people are going around giving these evil smiles and stuff like that. There's a really funny scene in the trailer where somebody's head bends backwards to give a smile in a car. That's all over the trailers and stuff. So that's stuff that gives people the impression this is going to be kind of like a slasher movie, like people smile and then they die around this person or something like that. But that's not really what it is. This is closer to something like, you're probably gonna hear me reference this movie a couple times, like It Follows or Hereditary, ones that really do have a little bit more, I don't want to say substance, what's the word I'm looking for, a little bit more depth and commentary to it, and it really wants to get a feeling of dread going on with it, and that's fine. And for the most part, the movie is doing it pretty well. But I just want to make that very clear. It's not a film you go in expecting to kind of laugh at the deaths and, the creepy smiles and stuff like that. Because admittedly, I was a little bit at the trailer. I know a lot of people were too, and they were excited to see it. This film takes itself very, very seriously. And for the most part, that's a strength. But it can hurt it a little bit in the long run. So just, again, without giving away too much, this is about a therapist who something traumatic happens to her involving a patient smiling, and it kind of follows her as well. Again, It Follows, they're very similar. But there's been movies like that before. The Ring does something kind of similar too. The idea of something being passed on to a next person, the next person is trying to figure out how to thwart it, how to get out of it. And she starts seeing people smiling, and she doesn't know if it's a nervous breakdown or there's some sort of evil entity that's following her, and you know how these movies go. You probably know what it is. And she tries telling everybody, nobody believes her, they all think she's crazy, and she has to find some way of thwarting it and finding the one or two people that will believe her, that will help her out, and all sorts of suspense and creepy imagery, all that good stuff happens. And what I like for the most part about this film is that this is the first horror film in a while. I mean, I don't want to say these never happen, but it's the first horror film in a while where I feel like the directing style was very unique, and I was noticing the directing a lot. And a lot of times that can be a bad thing, where the directing is a little too loud and it overpowers the story or the characters. But this didn't. There's a lot of choices in the music and the way some of the scares are done, and the fact that it takes its time a little bit more, that are very unique. And I like the way they shoot a lot of it. I like the way they'll reveal some of these scares. I even like the ideas they're tapping upon here. Well, not even tapping, very much spelling out. But again, that is totally fine. The acting is very good. Whoever is the woman in the opening. You see her in all the trailers, that's freaking out and then gives the evil smile to the therapist. She is not in the movie long, but she makes an impression, man. Like, she does a phenomenal job and is totally convincing, and does so in a way, I mean, we've all seen these parts where somebody's like, no, this happened to me, and then something terrible happens. I mean, there are a dime a dozen horror films. She really plays it like she is seeing what she is seeing, that she has this long story to her, this long backstory, even though we don't get a ton of it, we are told the backstory, and she just plays it like she was just coming off another movie, like there was another movie that just showed everything that happened to her, so she did a really great job, and most of the acting is very, very good. Some of the choices the characters make, I do question, only because this is something similar to what the movie Barbarian did, which I also did like. I did like that movie. But they do this thing where they act like we're not going to do the same thing that other horror films do. Not these characters. They're smarter than that. And then they'll make about 5 or 10 other dumb decisions. This woman is a therapist. And the first day she starts seeing stuff, she goes to a therapist as well and discusses what she's seeing and what should be done about and everything, and that's good. She's even saying, keep prescribed this medicine, maybe it might help me out, kind of stuff. But then everything keeps getting worse, and she just turns so quickly into thinking it's something supernatural. I didn't buy that. I thought it was way too fast a turn, where I really feel like she would constantly be trying to figure out other things it could be. Also, everything happens in the span of 4 or 5 days, something like that, and I feel like this should have happened over maybe a month or two or something like that. Like, everything happens a little too quickly. It feels like more time is passing, and it's not. But with that said, there are definitely some scenes that got some real scares out of me. There's one very early on where she's just in her home. She sees something in the shadows there. That got my heart pumping. There's another great scene, another great build-up, where I always love these build-ups where they're saying, like there's something behind you kind of thing. The person is slowly turning. You don't know what's going to be there. That's why I like movies like this a little bit more than slasher movies. You know what you're going to see. If Michael Myers is in a movie, you know it's going to be Michael Myers behind you. You know what I mean? But everyone has a different thing. And even slasher films play around with the genre a lot. So the build-ups, I would argue, are a little bit better than the scares. But there are some scares that are really good. Sometimes they do, I don't want to say jump scares, because they just do the thing where they're building up, the tension is high, like she's seeing something, and then someone, interrupts the tension and it scares her. To me, that isn't exactly a jump scare, because that's not like someone who's just walking by and then a hand taps him and chun! And it's like, hi, what are you doing? No, they're building up the tension regardless if that person was there. It's a necessary scene. But this one does some of these tricks a few too many times, where they're building up the tension and somebody interrupts it, or they're building up this music, this funky music, this experimental music. Again, I like how kind of experimental parts of this movie are, and then it'll just cut, it'll stop, and you really only should do that 2-3 times, something like that, and I feel like they do it maybe 4 times too many, where you start to kind of get sick of it and it gets a little tiring, but it's never quite too distracting. It's enough where I do say, man, I like that this film is kind of taking a chance with this and giving us this weird music and giving us kind of these weird angles and so forth, even if at times they do get a tad much, but nothing too crazy. But, okay, so with all that said, the problems in this movie were very tiny to me. And again, you kind of know, it's just part of the horror genre. It's just more when they act like, there's, we're not going to do the same thing every other horror film does. And then they do it, or they do different cliches. They're going to skip these cliches and kind of brag about it, and then just do a ton of others that we're tired of, that don't make the characters look particularly smart. But, okay. Those are, again, very, very general nitpicks. So my issue with this movie and the ending is that you have this setup where it is very much spelling out what the movie is a commentary of. And again, that is totally fine. You can do that. There's so many scenes where you can't interpret anything as a different way of looking at. No, they spell out what this is, what it's a commentary on. And again, I guess I won't ruin it, but what should be done about it, how you confront it, how you fix it, or however you want to put it. And that is all fine, but then you can't have the ending this movie has, in my opinion. If the ideas were more vague, or the commentary more vague, like, man, it could be about this, but it could also be about that as well, or maybe this other strange idea, or maybe it's a commentary on this, like it's where there's seeds of ideas and they start to grow, but then it's hard to make out what the plant is, you know what I mean? But with this, they plant the seeds and it's very clear what the plant is. I mean, it's like it's a sunflower or whatever, but if you plant these seeds and it's like, oh, I've never seen a plant like this. How do you interpret what this is, or what kind of species this is, whatever? That's something similar to what It Follows does, where yes, the idea is very clearly like it's an STD, but in terms of how you respond to it, or how you take it out, or can you take it out? What is it trying to say? Now, even like the time period is flexible in that movie, which is a little strange. I know I'm kind of praising it, but I never got into that, honestly. It's funny because actually I have my own issues with It Follows, but I'm saying the commentary on there was vague enough where if you were gonna have an ending that was kind of like a mean-spirited ending or something, it could get away with it. And you argue it kind of does, honestly. Again, I won't give away the movie, the ending of that either. But with this one, it just puts so out there what it's trying to do and what the solution to the problem is, that when you have an ending like this that is very much like a traditional horror film, that is something more like what you would see in something like Hereditary, another film that arguably has commentary but doesn't spell it out for you. I think that's going to be an issue. I think it works in something like Hereditary that also has this intense dread throughout the whole thing, but it doesn't. I know people that can leave that movie with 5 different ideas about what it's trying to say. This one, there's really only one thing you can get out of it, and the ending contradicts that. And I think that's a mistake. I think that's a problem. And I think people going into this that are suddenly like, okay, well, I'm taking in this commentary. I'm taking in what it's trying to get across. I think it's very clever. It's spelled out a little bit, but it does work. It does all tie together. Are gonna have issues with the ending. And the only way around is that you can say, well, that's just horror films. Horror films have these kind of endings, and you can kind of shrug it off and go, whatever, like maybe it's the Lion King principle, where if you look into the details of the message, it doesn't fully add up, but people know what the message is, and they'll walk away with that. And I'm hoping that's what people are going to do with this, because again, I feel like if you watch this film and what it's trying to say, and you take it very literal throughout the whole thing, it doesn't get across its message very well. But if you're looking at it like, okay, here's this commentary, and then it just becomes a horror film at the end, maybe you'll be okay with it, but I can definitely see some people having some issues with the ending here. I know I did, and I think I would have accepted it better if it didn't just hammer in the message. And again, I'm really okay if a horror film does that. I mean, there's so much commentary in horror films, but I will admit the ones I like more are the ones where you can read a lot of messages into it, and there's really, like I said, no other way to interpret a lot of what's going on in here and what it's trying to say. You could also make the argument there's things like, a giant monster has to be fought at the end and stuff like that, and that's usually kind of boring to me. But again, they do get creative, especially later, with the design of this monster. I mean, some of the imagery in this is very enjoyably bonkers, and not a ton, but just enough. And that's the other thing I want to ask, too, for anyone that's seen this. Are there points where you kind of snickered at moments where I don't think you're supposed to snicker? There's one scene involving a stabbing. That's all I'll say. I won't say any more outside of that. And as it was going on, I think it's supposed to be really horrific and scary and intense. And I was kind of snickering through it. The more it went on, it kind of got sillier and sillier. And I think if this movie was more vague and kind of had a little bit more of maybe a little bit more of a sense of humor to it, because again, everything's played like it's supposed to be really, really dramatic. I would like that scene fine, but again, I feel like so many scenes of these people smiling, giving these creepy smiles, is supposed to be taken just totally legit. And how can you not snicker a little bit at these creepy smiles? They are disturbing. I'm not going to say they're not. I'm not saying they don't get across the initial emotion that you're supposed to feel, which is creeped out. But how can you also not laugh a little bit? And I feel like if the movie had a little bit more of that tone, a little bit more of a sense of humor, kind of giving into it a little bit more, and maybe cut back on the commentary a little bit, I would maybe give this, like, I don't know, like 4 stars, 4 out of 4 stars, something like that, because I think it is doing a lot of stuff that's very inventive and kind of new, and going off of old styles and mixing it with new styles. But because they do spell it out too much, and I think it does take itself a little too seriously, which again, you can do that. Hereditary did that, and it was terrifying. But I feel like with this, that they're not at that point yet. If you're gonna be that serious, I think you gotta do something like The Shining, where you're going, well, what were they trying to say? What were they trying to get across? If you're literally gonna have the climax of this movie have a lot of it be a conversation just directly. I mean, sometimes they're looking right at the audience saying the point of the movie. I don't think you should be quite this dramatic and this serious, because it gets very close to being soapboxy. But what it's saying is good, and, you know, it's something that, I mean, I hope anyone watching would be like, yes, that's good advice, you know what I mean? But then when they get to the ending, they're going to be like, oh, well, they kind of screw that in the back, don't they? So, okay. Yeah, I think I got through that okay without giving away the spoiler, without giving away the ending. So, with that said, if you don't want any spoilers, I would probably say don't read the comments, because I am going to ask people, what did you think of this movie, specifically the ending? That's what I'm really, really curious about. Did people just say, yeah, horror film, it should end that way? Or are you saying, nah, man, that just went against everything that it was trying to do, and maybe the ending ruined the movie? Or maybe you're just like, nah, man, I like it until the ending, but still, what? That's just, you know, only a little bit of time. I still think it's really good. Or did you think it all came together perfect, and maybe it's saying something that isn't so spelled out? Maybe it's something that's, you know, much more subtle and vague, and I'm just missing it. So I love to know your thoughts on this movie. I love to know your reactions. Even if you don't want to talk about the ending, just did you enjoy the film? Were you expecting something else? Because I do know a few people who didn't like this movie because they were just thinking it was going to be kind of a goofy horror film. Like, they want the gore, they want the blood and stuff, but they don't want something this heavy. I didn't mind that it went so heavy. I just wish it didn't go quite so over the top in spelling it out, and then give it the ending that does belong with kind of a lighter, sillier horror film, if that makes sense. So, yeah, let me know your thoughts. I love to know what you think. That's about it, and I'll see you next time. Take care.